It starts with a question many people never want to face. What would you do if the whole world pointed at you and called you a thief, even when you knew you were innocent? That's where our story begins. With a woman standing alone, surrounded by whispers, stares, and cold hearts. Her name carried more suspicion than truth. People avoided her. Shops watched her closely. Neighbors spoke her name only to repeat the same rumor. She steals. But the strange thing, no one ever saw her take anything. No one had proof. It all began with a few missing items in town, small things at first, things easy to misplace. Then bigger things disappeared. And like a spark landing on dry grass, the rumor spread faster than facts could catch it. Someone needed a target. Someone needed someone to blame, and she became that target. Imagine walking through a place where every eye looks at you like you're guilty. Imagine hearing doors lock when you approach. Imagine having no one left to trust. She lived in that world every single day, even though she had done nothing wrong. She tried explaining. She tried defending herself. But the louder she spoke, the more people believed she was lying. That's the cruel thing about rumors, they grow stronger the more you fight them. And while the town drowned in suspicion, there was one person who didn't join the noise. A cowboy. Quiet, steady. The kind of man who didn't accept something just because everyone else believed it. He watched the situation from a distance at first, not to judge her but to understand what was really going on. Something about the whole story didn't feel right to him. The missing items, the rushed accusations, the way the woman looked more confused than guilty. He had seen enough of life to know that the truth rarely shouts. It hides in small places. It reveals itself only to those who actually look. And as the town grew louder with blame, the cowboy began to notice something else, something subtle, something strange happening in his own home. A misplaced object, a missing item he thought he had just seen, a faint sound at night that he brushed off as the wind. Tiny things, too small to call evidence but too odd to ignore. He didn't know it yet, but the real thief wasn't out there in the town. The real thief was much closer, a lot closer than anyone imagined. The trouble began on a warm evening, the kind where the whole town moved slowly and people gathered outside their shops to talk. That was when old Mr. Hammond first noticed something missing, a silver pocket watch he kept on the counter. He swore he had set it down only minutes earlier. People shrugged, but the whisper started. A few days later, Mrs. Turner's embroidered purse vanished from her porch. Then the fishing tools from the general store. Then canned food from a shed. Each disappearance was small, but each one added weight to the growing suspicion swirling through town. People wanted someone to blame, and they wanted that someone fast. And as cruel as it sounds, it's always easier to point at the person already standing alone. The woman had no family. She lived on the edge of town in a tiny cabin she rented with whatever small jobs she could get. She didn't speak much, didn't have friends, didn't have the comfort of a group to protect her. She simply existed, quietly. And somehow that quietness made her the perfect target. First came the subtle glances, then the whispers behind her back, then the stares that lasted too long, as if waiting for her to slip something into her pocket. At the bakery, the owner moved the tip jar closer to herself every time the woman entered. At the general store, the clerk followed her through every aisle, pretending to rearrange items that were already perfectly in place. Kids laughed as she walked by, calling her names they heard from their parents. Rumors don't need evidence, they just need repetition. One afternoon, everything escalated. Mrs. Gray, known for her sharp tongue and sharper suspicions, stepped outside the post office pointing straight at the woman. "There she is. She was the last one near my porch before my bread basket disappeared," she yelled. The woman froze. She had walked by, yes. She always took that road, but she had taken nothing. The gathered crowd grew tense, waiting. They wanted to see fear on her face. They wanted guilt. But all she managed to show was confusion. She tried to defend herself, her voice small but steady. "I didn't take anything, I'm just trying to get home." But no one heard the meaning behind her words. They only heard the surface. A denial. And in their minds, a denial was just another sign of guilt. Rumors quickly snowballed into certainty. A few missing items became everything she touches disappears. A passing glance became she was eyeing something to steal. And worst of all, her silence became she must be hiding something. She was watched everywhere she went, followed in stores, avoided on streets. The town had made up its mind before she even had a chance. Inside, she carried a heavy mix of fear and anger. Fear, because every day felt like walking through a storm of accusations. Anger, because she knew the truth but couldn't force anyone else to see it. She cried at night, wishing for a chance to prove herself innocent. But opportunities like that don't come easily when the whole world has decided you're guilty. The sheriff wasn't much help either. He didn't accuse her outright, but he didn't defend her either. He simply shrugged and said, "If folks are missing things, someone must be talking them. If it's not you, then who is it?" And that question followed her everywhere. If it wasn't her, then who? Even she started to wonder how someone could commit so many small thefts without anyone noticing. Her life became a daily struggle. Every step outside her cabin felt like walking into a wall of eyes. Every sound behind her made her jump. She avoided town as much as possible, not because she was guilty, but because she couldn't bear the stares anymore. Even the children whispered when she passed by, parroting the hate they heard from adults. But something else was happening behind all the noise, something quiet. The cowboy had been watching the situation unfold, not judging, not jumping to conclusions, just watching. He saw the woman's eyes when she got accused. He saw her fear, but he also saw something else, honesty. And he saw the way the town moved like a single creature with too many legs, all pointing in the same direction without a moment's thought. Yet the cowboy didn't fully understand the situation until one morning when he noticed one of his gloves missing from the barn. It wasn't a big thing, but it struck him odd. He was careful with his tools. He knew where he placed them. He brushed it off at first. Maybe he misplaced it. Maybe it fell. But later that same week, a jar of coins he kept on a shelf had shifted positions. Then an old lantern went missing altogether. The town blamed everything on the woman, but the cowboy's missing items didn't match their story. She hadn't been anywhere near his place, and she didn't seem like someone who would sneak around, stealing things and hiding them for no reason. Something felt off. As the accusations against the woman grew louder, the cowboy's thoughts grew sharper. He began to wonder if the town had been so focused on her that they stopped looking anywhere else. Maybe the thief wanted it that way. Maybe the thief was counting on the town's eagerness to judge. He started paying closer attention to his surroundings. Little sounds in the night. A door that didn't close the way he remembered. A faint rustle when the wind wasn't blowing. Things he once dismissed now became clues. And each clue pointed in a direction no one else even considered. Meanwhile, the woman's life kept collapsing. She stayed mostly indoors now, afraid of what people might do if she showed her face in town again. She was tired, exhausted from fighting a battle she never asked for. She wished someone, anyone, would believe her. And in a quiet way, someone already did. But the truth was about to reveal itself in a way no one expected. The real thief wasn't just hiding in plain sight. The real thief was hiding much closer than the town imagined, and the cowboy was getting closer to uncovering it. The cowboy was not the kind of man who ignored his instincts. He had spent years living on wide land, working with animals, reading weather patterns, waking before sunrise and resting only when the stars claimed the sky. Out there, far from the noise of crowded towns, silence teaches you to listen. Stillness teaches you to notice. And one thing he had learned from quiet living was this: when something feels wrong, it usually is. He first saw the woman when the accusations were still fresh, when the town was buzzing with excitement and suspicion. She walked past his barn one afternoon, her shoulders heavy, her eyes fixed on the dirt road ahead. She didn't look like someone who had something to hide. She looked like someone carrying a weight she didn't deserve. The cowboy watched her for a moment, then turned away, not wanting her to feel stared at. But even in that brief moment, he sensed something off about the whole story. Not about her, but about the way the town had reacted so quickly. People wanted answers, and she was the easiest person to throw blame on. A few days later, the cowboy noticed the missing glove. He shrugged it off at first, telling himself he was being careless. But when the lantern disappeared too, something tugged at him. It wasn't the value of the items that bothered him, it was the pattern. He worked alone. He rarely had visitors. He knew the sound of his own footsteps on the wooden floor. He knew the way his doors creaked when someone opened them. And lately, he had been hearing things he couldn't explain. Soft movements in the evening. A faint scraping sound near the back door. A broom leaning in a different direction than he remembered. A window slightly open when he was certain he had closed it. The more he noticed, the more uneasy he became. But uneasiness wasn't the same as fear. Instead, it sparked curiosity in him. The kind of curiosity that had helped him survive through storms, droughts, and unpredictable seasons. He started paying closer attention to the small things. He took mental pictures of where he placed his tools, how he arranged his shelves, which floorboards squeaked under his boots. And deep inside, he felt the beginning of a puzzle forming. Around this time, he began observing the woman from a quiet distance. Not spying. Just watching the way she moved through town, the way people treated her, the tension in her face as she tried to avoid trouble. He noticed how she never hurried, how her steps were slow, almost tired, how she always kept her hands visible, almost as if she wanted to show she wasn't hiding anything. And the thing that struck him most was the loneliness she carried, a loneliness that couldn't be faked. One morning, he was buying supplies at the general store when he overheard two men whispering behind him. "She stole again last night." "Of course she did, that woman's been nothing but trouble. She'll slip up one day, thieves always do." The cowboy didn't turn around, he just listened. He knew the woman hadn't been near his ranch in weeks, yet he still had missing items. The rumors didn't match reality, but the town was so determined to believe the worst that no one bothered to look deeper. That afternoon, as he rode home, he felt the nagging feeling return, stronger this time. Something inside him whispered that the missing items and the accusations weren't coincidences. And the more he thought about it, the more he felt an odd connection between the two. Perhaps the thief was using the chaos of the rumors to move unnoticed. Perhaps the thief knew the town would keep its eyes fixed on the woman, leaving everything else unguarded. That thought settled uncomfortably in his mind, and he knew he couldn't ignore it anymore. As the sun dipped behind the hills, the cowboy sat on his front porch, sipping water from a tin cup. The air was still. The light was fading. And that was when he noticed a shadow move near the side of his house. It was quick, small, almost easy to miss, but he had seen it. He stood up slowly, every muscle in his body awake. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't shout. He simply walked toward the sound, each step silent and steady. When he reached the side of the house, he found nothing unusual, just the wall, the windows, the dirt. But something had changed. His broom, which he had leaned against the wall earlier, was now lying flat on the ground. Something had brushed against it, or someone. That night he barely slept. Every sound felt sharper. Every whisper of wind felt heavier. He wanted answers, but he knew rushing would only make the truth slip further away. So he waited. He watched. He listened. The next morning he rode into town again and saw the woman standing alone near the well. She looked tired, her hair slightly messy, her clothes worn from stress and worry. People walked around her as if she didn't exist, until they needed someone to blame. The cowboy approached her slowly, not wanting to startle her. "You all right?" he asked in his calm voice. She looked at him with surprise. Most people avoided talking to her. "I'm fine," she said softly, though she clearly wasn't. He studied her face for a moment. There was no deceit there. Only exhaustion, fear, and a desperate hope that someone might finally listen. "Has anyone actually seen you take anything?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "No, but they don't need to. They already decided I did." The cowboy nodded. He knew exactly how towns could be when fear mixed with gossip. "Sometimes people see what they want to see," he said. "But truth doesn't hide forever." She didn't fully understand what he meant, but his tone made her pause. For the first time in weeks, she felt a small spark of hope. Maybe he believed her. Maybe she wasn't as alone as she thought. As he walked away, the cowboy felt something settle inside him. A certainty. He didn't know who the real thief was yet, but he knew where to look closer to home, much closer than anyone imagined. And he was ready to uncover the truth, no matter what he found. The cowboy didn't jump to confrontation. That wasn't his way. Years on the ranch had taught him that rushing into a problem only scared the truth away. So instead, he stepped back and began observing his surroundings with the same patience he used when dealing with wild horses. He paid attention to things most people ignored: the drag of a footprint, the shift of a curtain, the faint smell of something out of place. He treated his own home like unfamiliar ground, studying it as if a stranger lived there with him. The first thing he did was check every corner of the house, not aggressively, not in panic, just calmly and methodically. He counted his tools, checked the pantry, made sure his doors and windows were secure. At first glance, nothing screamed danger or disturbance. But the deeper he looked, the more little things stood out, tiny clues that someone had been moving quietly where they shouldn't be. One evening, he found the back window slightly lifted, even though he remembered shutting it tight. He gently pressed his palm against the wood frame and felt a faint imprint, something oily, like a hand had pushed it open recently. Not the wind, not an animal. Someone had opened that window. Someone had slipped in or out without a sound. He started checking his storage shed more often. That was when he discovered a small pile of crumbs near a sack of grain. He hadn't spilled anything there. He knew that for certain. The grain sack had also been shifted, just slightly, but enough for someone with a sharp eye to notice. Whoever was sneaking around his property wasn't just taking things. They were hiding. Some nights he heard the softest shuffle near the barn, too light to be a grown man, too cautious to be a wild creature. It made him wonder what kind of thief would steal such small items. Not valuables, not money, but gloves, food, a lantern, simple tools. Things a desperate person might need. Back in town, the woman's situation only grew worse. The more the townspeople lost, the more they pointed at her. Even innocent glances in their direction felt like accusations now. When she walked through the market, merchants pulled their stands closer, some even covering their items with blankets. Children whispered and pointed at her, imitating their parents. She tried to remain calm, but inside her chest was a storm that wouldn't settle. Every day she prayed someone would finally listen, not just hear her words, but actually listen. And someone was. The cowboy kept watching her from a distance, not because he didn't trust her, but because he wanted to understand the truth hidden beneath all the noise. He noticed how she reacted when someone accused her. Her face didn't twist in guilt, but in frustration and sadness. He noticed how she held herself, always steady, always visible, never acting like someone trying to hide something. She moved with the burden of someone wrongly blamed, not with the anxiety of someone avoiding exposure. One day he approached her again. This time he asked her directly about the missing items. "Tell me everything," he said softly. "Where were you when the first things went missing?" She hesitated. Not because she had something to hide, but because she had grown used to people twisting her words. "I was at the river washing clothes," she said. "I was alone. No one saw me, but that's the truth." He believed her. Not because her story was perfect, but because her eyes didn't flicker with deception. She spoke with the tired honesty of someone who had nothing left to lose. "Has anyone ever come near your cabin?" he asked. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I hear noises at night, but when I look, no one is there." That caught his attention. His home wasn't the only place with strange disturbances. Maybe the thief wasn't choosing victims. Maybe the thief wasn't targeting certain homes. Maybe the thief was simply moving, constantly searching for places to hide, staying one step ahead of suspicion. After speaking with her, the cowboy returned to his ranch with a new determination. He wasn't watching for a criminal now. He was tracking a pattern. He checked under his porch, behind the haystacks, inside the barn loft. That's when he found something unusual, a small piece of torn fabric snagged on a nail. The fabric was tiny, like from a child's shirt. That stopped him cold. A child. That possibility twisted everything he thought he knew. Why would a child steal from homes? Why hide in barns and sheds? What drove someone so young to sneak around in the shadows? The thought made his chest tighten, not with fear but with empathy. He had seen enough of life to know that desperation made people do things they'd never normally do. That night, he left a lantern outside, on purpose. He wanted to see if it would disappear. He placed it near the barn door, lit but subtle, and then hid behind the fence, watching. Hours passed. The moon climbed high. The air turned cold. And then finally he saw movement. A small figure crept near the barn. Light footsteps barely disturbed the ground. The figure reached for the lantern with trembling hands, as if unsure whether it was safe to touch. The cowboy didn't move. Not yet. He needed to understand before he acted. The tiny figure pulled the lantern close, glanced around nervously, and disappeared toward the back of the house. The cowboy followed softly, keeping a careful distance. He saw the small shape slip behind the old woodpile, then vanish as if swallowed by the shadows. He approached slowly, each step controlled. When he looked behind the woodpile, he discovered a small gap between the logs, a space big enough for someone small to crawl through. It led straight beneath the house. His house. His heart beat a little faster, not with fear but with the realization that the thief wasn't just visiting. The thief was living there. Now he knew he wasn't just tracking a thief. He was tracking someone who knew this land well enough to hide where no adult would fit. Someone who took only what they needed. Someone who wanted to stay unseen. And for the first time, the cowboy understood that the truth was far more complicated and far closer than anyone in town imagined. The cowboy stood there in the dim glow of the fading lantern, staring at the narrow crawl space beneath his house. A space too small for any grown person. A space that had been disturbed recently. He knelt down, feeling the cool earth beneath his palms, and peered into the darkness. At first he saw nothing. Just shadows, dirt, and old wooden beams. But then a faint shuffle echoed from within, soft, hesitant, like someone trying to stay quiet but failing. He didn't move. He didn't even breathe loudly. He simply waited, letting the silence settle around him. Slowly, a pair of eyes appeared in the darkness. Wide, frightened eyes. The kind that belonged to someone who knew fear better than comfort. Someone who expected punishment instead of mercy. A moment later, a small face peeked into the waning light. It was a boy, no older than 10. His clothes were torn, his hair messy, his cheeks smudged with dirt. He looked like he hadn't had a full meal in days. The cowboy's heart tightened at the sight. This wasn't the face of a criminal. This was the face of a child who had been running from something. The boy jerked back the second he realized he'd been seen, scrambling deeper into the shadows. The cowboy reached out, not to grab him but to show he wasn't a threat. "Easy now," he said softly, his voice calm and steady. "I'm not gonna hurt you." No reaction, just shaky breathing from inside the crawl space. "I know you've been taking things," he continued, still gentle, "but I want to understand why." More silence. Then a weak voice answered from the dark. I'm sorry." The cowboy felt the weight of those words, not defensive, not angry. "Just scared. You hungry?" he asked. There was a pause long enough for him to wonder if the boy would answer at all. Then a small whisper came. "Yes." That was all the cowboy needed to hear. He stood up slowly and walked back toward the house, making sure not to make any sudden moves. Inside, he grabbed a slice of bread, a small piece of dried meat, and a cup of water. When he returned to the spot near the woodpile, he set the food down on the ground, stepped back several paces, and waited. At first, nothing happened. Then, like a frightened animal testing safety, the boy's hand reached out from under the house, snatched the bread, and disappeared again. A few moments later, he did the same with the meat and the water. The cowboy watched quietly. He didn't speak. He didn't push. He let the child decide the pace. When the boy finished eating, he slowly emerged, only halfway, his small frame trembling, his eyes still full of caution. The cowboy knelt again, staying on the boy's level. "What's your name?" he asked. The boy hesitated, then murmured, "Eli." "Eli," the cowboy repeated, nodding slowly. "How long you been hidden here?" The boy glanced down. "A while. I didn't know where else to go." "Where's your family?" the cowboy asked, his tone soft enough to carry concern, not interrogation. Eli's eyes filled with a pain no child should ever know. "Gone." The cowboy didn't push further. He didn't need details to understand that whatever happened had left this child alone, desperate, and surviving the only way he knew how, by hiding and taking whatever scraps he could find. "So all those things around town," the cowboy said quietly. The boy nodded, tears forming. "I wasn't trying to be bad, I just didn't want to die." Those words cut deeper than any accusation in town ever could. A child trying to stay alive, blamed as a thief, hunted by rumors that never spoke the truth. And the woman, she had suffered the most because Eli had never been seen. The town saw missing objects and pointed at the easiest target. They never bothered to look under their own feet. The cowboy took a slow breath. "Eli, you didn't mean harm, but people are hurtin' because they think someone's stealing from them." The boy's face fell. He understood. Even in his fears, he understood right and wrong. "I didn't want her to get blamed," Eli whispered, "but I was scared. I thought if I showed myself, they'd lock me away." The cowboy shook his head gently. "That woman didn't do anything wrong. She's been sufferin' because folks were too quick to judge." Eli looked devastated. "I'm sorry, I didn't know what to do." The cowboy placed a steady hand on the ground, not touching the boy, but close enough to show acceptance. "You came to the right place, son. You ain't alone anymore." For the first time, Eli's shoulders relaxed just a little, not fully, but enough to show that hope had found a way through his fear. He crawled out a little more, the lantern's warm glow revealing his thin arms and bruised knees. The cowboy could see clearly now. This wasn't a criminal. This was a wounded child who had been punished by life long before he ever took a thing. The cowboy stood up slowly. "Come inside," he said. "We'll get you cleaned up. We'll figure this out together." Eli hesitated, glancing toward the open fields as if expecting danger to come running from the darkness. But then he looked up at the cowboy, at the gentle eyes, the steady voice, the calm he hadn't felt in ages. And he nodded. As the cowboy guided the boy toward the house, one truth settled in his mind like a storm finally breaking. The woman was innocent all along, and the real thief, the one hiding in his own home, had been a scared child fighting for survival. The cowboy knew this changed everything, for the town, for the woman, for Eli, and most of all, for the truth that was about to come to light. The cowboy didn't sleep that night, not because he was afraid, but because his mind kept replaying everything that had happened. Eli was safe inside the house now, curled up on a pile of blankets near the fireplace, too exhausted to stay awake after finally eating a real meal. The boy's face, even in sleep, looked tense, like he expected the world to take something from him the moment he let his guard down. The cowboy sat nearby, watching the firelight flicker across the boy's features. It was hard to imagine how terrified Eli must have felt, hiding under a stranger's house, stealing small scraps of food, living day to day with no promise of tomorrow. Morning arrived slowly, with pale light creeping across the floorboards. The cowboy stood, stretched, and prepared breakfast. The smell of warm eggs pulled Eli's eyes open. The boy looked around as if making sure he was still safe. When he noticed the cowboy, he stiffened for a moment, then relaxed when he remembered he wasn't hiding anymore. "Morning," the cowboy said gently. Eli nodded. "Morning." They ate in silence at first. The boy wasn't used to talking, and the cowboy wasn't one to push. After a while, Eli spoke quietly. "Are you gonna tell the town?" The cowboy took a slow breath. It was a heavy question for such a small voice. "I'm gonna tell the truth," he said, "and the truth always comes out one way or another." Eli stared at his plate. "They're gonna hate me." "Maybe," the cowboy admitted. "But they'll stop hating someone who didn't do nothing wrong." Eli lowered his eyes. He knew exactly who the cowboy meant, the woman who had suffered the consequences of his silent hiding. He chewed slowly, guilt weighing on his small shoulders. After the meal, the cowboy stepped outside to think. The morning air was crisp, the sky wide and clear. He knew the town wouldn't take the truth easily. People don't like being wrong, especially when they've spent so much time convincing themselves they're right. But letting an innocent woman suffer wasn't something he could overlook, and leaving a wounded boy alone wasn't something his conscience would allow. He called Eli outside. The boy emerged hesitantly, clutching his worn jacket close to his thin frame. "You ready to come with me?" the cowboy asked. Eli swallowed hard. "Where are we going?" "To fix what's broken," the cowboy said simply. The boy nodded, though fear trembled through him. Still, he followed. The ride into town was quiet. The cowboy kept a steady pace, making sure Eli felt safe. As they entered the town square, people turned to look. Some nodded respectfully at the cowboy. Others frowned, noticing the small figure riding with him. Whispers rose like smoke. "Who's that kid? Where'd he come from? What's going on?" The cowboy ignored them. He rode straight toward the sheriff's office, dismounted, and helped Eli down. Together they walked inside. The sheriff looked up, surprised. "Mornin', cowboy. What brings you?" He paused when he saw Eli. The boy hid slightly behind the cowboy's arm. "This here is the one who's been talkin' things," the cowboy said calmly. "He's been livin' under my house." The sheriff's eyes widened. "A child?" "You sure?" The cowboy nodded. "He didn't take much, only enough to stay alive, and the woman you all blamed, she didn't do a thing." Silence filled the room. The sheriff leaned back, rubbing his jaw. Outside, people strained to listen through the open door. "So we were wrong," he said quietly. "Yes," the cowboy replied. The sheriff sighed. "Folks won't like hearing it." "That ain't the point," the cowboy said. "They need to hear it." The sheriff stepped outside with the cowboy and Eli. The gathered crowd fell silent instantly. They stared at the trembling boy, then at the cowboy, waiting for answers. The sheriff raised his voice. "People of this town, listen up. We've found the one who's been talking food and small items. It wasn't the woman you accused. It was this boy." A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd, shock, confusion, shame. "He ain't dangerous," the sheriff continued. "He's just a scared kid who lost his family and didn't know where to go." A few people looked down at their boots. A few exchanged guilty glances. But some stubborn faces stayed tight, unwilling to admit fault. That's how towns worked. Some hearts opened, some stayed shut. The cowboy stepped forward, his voice steady. "You all judged that woman without proof," he said. "You let fear make up your minds. And you hurt her for something she didn't do." The crowd grew still. No one could argue with a man who rarely spoke without reason. "She deserves better," he said, "and this boy deserves a chance." Slowly, the woman appeared at the edge of the crowd. She had heard the whispers and followed them here, unsure if she belonged in this moment. When she saw Eli, she froze. The cowboy approached her gently. "You were innocent," he told her. "We know that now." Her eyes filled with tears, not of relief alone, but of exhaustion. Weeks of pain, fear, and isolation melted into that one moment of vindication. Eli stepped forward, his voice trembling. "I'm sorry, I never meant for you to get blamed." The woman knelt down, meeting his eyes. Instead of anger, she showed something unexpected, understanding. She knew what it felt like to be scared, alone, and unheard. "It's all right," she whispered. "You were just trying to survive." The crowd watched her in silence. Her compassion, after everything she'd endured, humbled them in a way no lecture could. The cowboy looked at both of them, two souls misjudged by the world, brought together by truth finally rising to the surface. And as he stood there, with the sun warming the dusty street and the town's heartbeat slowing from chaos to clarity, he knew one thing for certain. Sometimes it takes only one honest person to stop a lie that's been growing for far too long.